The land stretched outward like a dried tongue, parched and cracked beneath a white sun that didn't blink. Even the wind moved slow here, dragging itself over the brittle grasses and past the broken fence posts, where strands of rusted wire hung like forgotten prayers. Above, the sky bore down immense and endless, a pale vault brushed with cloudbone and old light. It didn't offer shade or mercy, only distance. Whit rode beneath that sky, a lean figure mounted on a bay gelding whose hooves kicked up faint ghosts of dust. Horse and rider moved like they belonged to the land, part of its silence. The saddle creaked softly beneath him, and the wind touched the brim of his hat, lifting it just slightly, as if trying to see his face. No one knew where he came from, only that he'd once been a name men whispered in bunkhouses and sheriff's offices, and now he was a man of few words and fewer attachments. His coat was weathered, long and heavy with dust and blood not freshly drawn. His rifle, slung across his back, hadn't spoken in months. He came upon the outpost around noon, what was left of it, a single building with no windows, roof sunken in, a water trough beside the ruin, green with algae and full of dead flies. He dismounted in silence and let the gelding drink. The only sounds were the lapping of the horse, the moaning wind, and the distant caw of crows echoing across the flats. Whit's boots stirred dry earth as he walked to the skeletal post where once a sign had hung, something that might have said, "Welcome to Low Vale." Now only a piece of rusted chain swayed from the beam, but nailed to the wood, curling at the edges, was a torn flyer. He stepped closer. The paper flapped weakly in the wind, held down by a single iron nail through its top. The image had faded, a woman's face, maybe. The name beneath had been scratched out in broad, angry strokes. But just below it, written in what looked like charcoal, hastily, perhaps with a burnt stick, someone had scrawled, "She walks with the weight of a name not her own." Whit stood still, reading it more than once. Something moved in the trees behind him. A crow, black and silent. It perched on the edge of the broken roof and tilted its head. He didn't touch the paper, didn't take it down. Instead, he turned back toward the trough, where his horse now stood quietly, belly full, reins hanging loose. From a distance, the world looked empty, but Whit had learned to listen for what wasn't said. The air here was heavy with a silence that didn't come from peace. It was the silence of things buried too shallow. He climbed back into the saddle and nudged the gelding forward, heading north, where the land rose slowly into hills flecked with dead trees and dry brush. The sky widened as he went. No path marked the way, but Whit followed the trail of memory, not his own, but something older, etched into the way the land resisted the sun. For hours he rode without seeing a soul. The wind spoke in low tones through rock canyons. Once he passed a broken windmill, its blades rusted and still. At its base, the skeleton of a mule lay half buried in sand. He didn't stop. By late afternoon, the light had changed, softened just enough to throw long shadows over the trail. The sun dipped behind the hills, and the sky took on a bruised hue, like it had been holding in tears all day. Whit stopped when he saw the orchard. It was the only green thing for miles, though barely. Trees, bent and dry, their leaves yellowing, their branches bearing only the memory of fruit. A crooked fence bordered the land, held together by rope and stubbornness. There, among the rows of dying trees, was a figure. She moved slowly, kneeling beside one of the trunks, pressing something into the soil. Water, perhaps. Her dress was simple, pale and worn. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow and her hands were stained with earth. A hat shaded her face, but a strand of dark hair escaped and clung to her cheek. Whit dismounted, but didn't call out. He tied the gelding loosely to a post and walked to the edge of the orchard, boots crunching softly on the dry ground. The woman didn't look up. She was focused on her task, folding dirt over roots, smoothing the soil with her fingers. It wasn't farming. It was a kind of tending, like someone touching an old scar, not to heal it, but to remember where it came from. He watched her a while, silent. When she finally looked up, her eyes met his without surprise. No fear, just a quiet recognition, as if she'd known he was coming. "Water's thin," she said, voice low, like wind through leaves. "But if you need a trough, there's one behind the barn." Whit nodded once. She stood slowly, brushing her hands on her skirt. The fading light hit her face, not young, not old, worn but not broken. A faint mark showed on the skin just above her collarbone, partially hidden by the frayed edge of her dress. A brand. She didn't hide it. Neither of them spoke again. She turned back to her tree and he walked toward the barn. The crows circled above, crying out now. Not warnings, not omens, just watchers, witnesses. The barn was half collapsed on one side, but the trough was there. Water, clearer than expected. He filled a tin cup from the rain barrel beside it and drank slowly. He thought of the flyer again. She walks with the weight of a name not her own. That weight was visible in her shoulders, not bowed but firm, carried, not suffered. As night fell, he unsaddled the horse and found a place beside the barn. Out of the wind, he built no fire, cooked nothing, just leaned against the wood and listened. Somewhere in the orchard, the woman moved. Branches whispered above her, and the crows quieted. Whit pulled his coat tighter. The stars blinked overhead, watching. He didn't ask her name, didn't offer his. Somewhere behind silence, something old was waking, not a storm, not danger, something slower. Roots, maybe. Dawn broke not with color, but with a deepening of silence. The orchard lay still under the dull gray of morning, its branches reaching into the sky like fingers, seeking mercy. In the pale light, the trees seemed less like plants and more like silhouettes of the past, unmoving, brittle with time. Leaves stirred only slightly, brushing one another with dry sighs. Dust hung in the air, suspended in gold. Whit stood beside the barn, unshaven and unmoved, steam rising from the metal cup in his hand. He'd found coffee beans in a tin near the rain barrel and a dented kettle inside the barn. Nothing had been said, but she must have left it there. A silent allowance. The breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and something faintly sweet, maybe rotting fruit, maybe earth after old rain. He sipped slowly, watching the orchard. As a man watches a graveyard, he's not yet ready to enter. She appeared again, just as the light shifted. Same wide-brimmed hat, same quiet movements. Her dress clung to her knees with damp from the soil. This morning she carried a small tin pail. She knelt beneath a tree, peeled back the earth, and poured water with care, as if the soil itself were fragile. Whit stayed at the edge of her world, near the fence where the wire sagged like tired bones. He didn't announce himself, didn't move closer. Some things didn't need permission, they just needed time. Eventually her voice came across the stillness. "You ride far?" He didn't answer right away, took another sip. Then, "Far enough." A pause. Then she looked at him sideways beneath the brim. "And long?" "Longer than far." She nodded once. "Figures." Another silence, but this one wasn't empty. Whit stepped toward the fence and rested a hand on the old wood. "Name's Whit," he said, not looking at her. She didn't give hers. Instead, she stood and walked toward the next tree. "These were apricots," she said, "when the world was kinder." He watched her hands. They weren't small, calloused and lined, made for work, not lace. A scar crossed the back of one knuckle. She noticed him noticing and shrugged. "Thorns," she said simply. The orchard was dying, no question. Every third tree was bare. Fruit came now in small, bitter attempts, hard and pale, clinging to the branches like regrets. But she still came each morning, still poured water, still cut weeds with a hooked knife tied to her hip. Whit offered no help, just stood and watched. Midday passed in slowness. He mended a leather strap on his saddle. She patched a tear in the roof of the chicken coop, though he hadn't seen a single hen. When their eyes met, it wasn't awkward, just there, like weather. Inside the house she had a stove that whined when it was lit, and a kettle that had lost its whistle. She didn't invite him in, but when he wandered close, the door remained open. The kitchen was worn but clean. A Bible sat on the mantel, its spine cracked from use, pages thinned at the corners. A knife hung beside the window, blade long and worn, its edge clean. A faded photograph was pinned above the stove, 4 figures too far away to make out clearly. One of them wore the same wide-brimmed hat. She stirred something in a pot, beans maybe, or lentils. The smell filled the space, warm and faintly bitter. "You a preacher?" she asked, not turning. "No." "You carry yourself like one." He let that sit a moment. Used to ride with one, he talked more than he prayed. She smiled at that, not a laugh, not even a grin, just the soft twitch of something that had once known how to feel safe. "I'm not much for talk," he added. "Neither am I," she said. They ate in silence on opposite ends of the table. She passed him a plate without comment, and he took it with a nod. The beans were overcooked, and there was no salt. Still, he ate every bite. Later they sat outside as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant storms that wouldn't come. The sun dipped behind the hills, and the orchard fell into long shadows. "You gonna stay long?" she asked. Whit glanced toward his horse. "A few nights, if it's not a bother. Plenty of space," she said. Then, as if remembering something from another life, she added, "So long as you know how to keep to yourself." He nodded. That he understood. The moon rose slow and round, pale as bone. The trees swayed slightly now, murmuring to one another. Whit watched her walk back into the orchard, lantern in hand. She stopped at one of the trees and tied a strip of cloth around a low branch. A marker, maybe, or a ritual. In the dark, the cloth fluttered like a spirit. He didn't ask what it meant. Didn't need to. That night the wind howled louder. Something in the barn creaked. A long, dragging sound. Whit sat with his back against the door, rifle across his knees. The sky overhead had turned silver with stars. Sleep came in patches. Dreams moved like shadows behind curtains, shapeless but heavy. Just before dawn, he saw her again, standing among the trees, looking up at the sky. Her back was to him, but he could see her breath in the cold air. Her arms were folded, not in warmth, but in memory. The brand above her collarbone had caught the moonlight. Faint, but still visible. A mark she didn't hide. A name she no longer carried. Whit leaned his head back and looked up. The stars blinked like watchful eyes. Somewhere, a crow stirred in the rafters, and far below all that, 2 people remained awake. Not out of fear, but because sleep couldn't follow them into this place. There were no words to speak yet. Just actions. Just presence. And under the bruised sky of that quiet night, something took root. Not love, not yet, but its shadow. The wind changed on the 3rd morning. It came colder, tighter, pulling dust across the land in low spirals. The orchard moaned beneath its touch. Branches clacked together like old bones whispering through clenched teeth. Whit rose before first light, already dressed, boots laced and coat wrapped close. The stars above were dimming slowly, paling in the presence of the sun that had not yet arrived. He stood in the open yard sipping black coffee brewed over a fire of cedar twigs. The wood cracked like soft gunshots, sending warmth into the crisp air. His gaze didn't wander. It was fixed on the edge of the hills, where the road bent between rocks like a sleeping snake. She came out a few minutes later, still tying the back of her hair. A ribbon, frayed at the ends, held it in place. Her hands were red from cold. Her boots were thick with mud, and the hem of her dress trailed dry leaves. "They're coming," she said, not as a warning, but as fact. Whit nodded once. "Riders? 3, maybe 4. They don't wear guns like cowhands, don't speak like traders." She paused. "They smell like paper and fire." He didn't ask what that meant, just tossed the rest of his coffee into the dirt and holstered his sidearm, not drawn, not shown, but present. By mid-morning, the dust rose behind the band. 4 riders, clean coats, well-fed horses. Their hats were stiff, not worn by weather. Their boots shined where the stirrups hadn't dulled them. They looked like men who sat in back rooms writing names they'd never speak aloud, the kind of men who hired others to make sure debts were remembered. When they approached, she was standing in the field, apron on, arms folded. She didn't move toward them, didn't wave, just waited. Whit leaned against the barn's frame, arms crossed, eyes hooded beneath the brim of his hat. He didn't interfere, but he didn't disappear either. The tallest rider, a man with a square chin and long gray coat, tipped his hat as he drew closer. "Mara," he said, like saying her name caused him discomfort. "Didn't expect to see you still here. Didn't expect you to come this far out yourself, Mr. Darren." Darren smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Family land or not, it's been foreclosed." "Letters were sent." She didn't blink. "I didn't read them." Another man chuckled behind Darren, young and lean, with a scar that ran from cheekbone to lip. The third and fourth men didn't speak at all. Their eyes moved between Whit and the trees. "You're squatting, Mara, a crime. No judge west of the Rio would argue otherwise." Her voice didn't rise. "You want the trees? Take them." "You know what I want." Darren's gaze dropped to the soil, to the orchard, then to the skin just beneath her collar where the brand lived like an unwanted truth. The silence stretched. Even the crows were still. Whit stepped forward then, slow. His spurs didn't jingle. They whispered. "Coffee's hot if you're lost," he said. "But if you came to reclaim pride, best bring a preacher." The young man with the scar shifted in his saddle. Darren raised a hand. "Didn't catch your name, stranger." Wasn't offering it. Darren looked between them. Something about Whit's posture, the way his hand rested on the fence post, not on his weapon, gave pause. The wind lifted Whit's coat slightly, revealing the worn handle of a revolver, not polished, not showy, just ready. "This isn't about her," Darren finally muttered. "It's about the name she disgraced, the family name, her father's, her brother's." "She's the one still here," Whit said. "That count for nothing." The scarred one spat into the dust. "Counts for shame." Mara stepped forward then. "You came all this way to remind me of what I already carry." Darren squinted. "You think this little patch of dirt redeems you? You think planting seeds erases what was done?" She didn't answer. Her eyes met his, and they didn't flinch. Darren turned his horse with a snap of the reins. "We'll be back. Next time, we won't come with words." The others followed, kicking up dust as they went, until only hoof prints remained, sharp and heavy, like wounds in the earth. When the silence returned, it was different. She went back to her trees, picked up the pail she'd dropped. The water had spilled into the soil, darkening it. She poured again from the barrel, not speaking. Her movements were the same, careful, deliberate, but something inside her had gone still. Whit didn't ask. He didn't need to. That evening, she didn't light the lamp inside the house. They sat in the dark, each with a cup of something warm. Outside, the trees rustled faintly, and the wind dragged dust along the path the riders had taken. "They were my kin," she said finally, "the ones who sent them. I wore the name like a wedding dress once. Now they want it back. Clean." Whit looked into the firelight, flickering low between them. "It don't wash clean," he said, "and not names, not blood. Only thing that purifies is time. Or fire." She nodded slowly. "This orchard was planted by my grandfather. The name was strong then. People came here to buy apricots and cider. My father sold it all for contracts and rail shares." She touched the edge of her collarbone, where the brand lay hidden. "They branded me when I wouldn't marry the man they chose. Said I'd brought shame. Said I carried no honor, no legacy. Just a burned-out name." Whit stared into the flames. "You still wear it." "It's part of me, but I don't answer to it." Outside, the wind blew harder. Leaves scattered across the dirt like whispers running from the past. "I don't think they're done with you," he said. "I know." "You want me gone?" he asked, not unkindly. She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said. "I want you near, not for safety, but for silence." He nodded. That he understood more than anything else. That night, while she slept inside, Whit sat on the porch, rifle across his lap. Not out of fear, out of ritual. The stars were sharp above. The moon hung low, caught in the branches like an eye that could not close. And somewhere in the dirt beneath the orchard, the memory of wolves stirred. Not the kind that hunted flesh, but the kind that hunted what a name used to mean. The fourth morning came red. Not gold, not blue, not soft, but red, bleeding through clouds that hung low like bruises. The air was dry in the mouth, but heavy on the skin. The kind of morning that made birds fall quiet, that made old wood ache in its grain. Whit felt it in his bones before he saw it. The silence, the omen. Mara moved through the orchard with a bucket in one hand and a wrapped cloth in the other. She paused at each tree, pressing the cloth against cracked bark, soaking the wood with something that smelled faintly of vinegar and herbs. Her movements were different now, not tender but purposeful, brisk, the ritual of care stripped down to necessity. "They'll come at night," she said. Whit was sitting on the porch, sharpening his knife. His rifle leaned against the doorframe. His face was still. Why not day? Because men like Darren think cruelty's more sacred when it comes in the dark. Whit nodded. His thumb moved slowly along the edge of the blade. She went back to her work. The cloth stained her fingers with dark streaks, like ink or old blood. By afternoon, the wind had stilled completely. Even the crows, ever present above the barn, had vanished to the hills. The orchard stood in a kind of breathless pause, its branches motionless against a sky gone pale and hot. Time slowed into long, quiet stretches. Mara placed a single bucket beside the base of the largest tree. Then, without looking at Whit, she said, "They'll want to set fire to it." He turned his head. "The tree?" She nodded. "It's where my mother's name is carved." She walked over to it, knelt, and traced her fingers across the base of the trunk. A weathered etching, faded nearly smooth, caught the light. A name, Naomi Clare, letters half-eaten by bark. She planted the first seed here, before the land was titled, before there were fences. Said God gave her this place before men claimed it. They hated her for that. Whit stood, quiet. "They can't erase her," Mara said, "not while this tree's standing." A cloud passed over the sun, shadows deepened. Somewhere in the hills, a hawk cried once, then nothing. That night, they didn't light a lamp, didn't eat, only sat side by side on the porch steps, watching the last light pull itself from the earth. Mara had a small bottle of something amber. She passed it to Whit. He drank without asking what it was. The warmth burned but didn't comfort. When the first flame appeared in the dark, it was small, a flicker against the base of the hill, then another to the east, then a third. They came on foot. Darren's men wore kerchiefs and carried torches made from fence posts. One had a shotgun, another dragged a sack, heavy and slumping, full of what? Whit didn't guess. Whit stood, no movement quick, no show, just rose, rifle in hand, not aimed, just held. Mara remained seated. Darren emerged from the shadows last, torch in one hand, letter in the other. His voice carried more than it should have. "This is a lawful seizure," he called. "We have written orders, and we have claim." Mara didn't move. "You stay silent," he said, stepping forward. "You don't contest. Then we leave you a place to sleep." Whit stepped between them, rifle low. "You bring fire and you talk of law." Darren raised the letter like a shield. "This is our right." "The tree's older than your right," Whit said. One of the younger men stepped forward, torch raised high. Mara's voice was the one that stopped him. "If you touch that tree," she said, "you burn what you'll never understand." The wind picked up just slightly. A low groan passed through the orchard. Darren took a step. "This is pride. That's all this is." "No," she said. "This is memory. This is what you call shame, because it won't bow." He raised the torch. Then Whit's rifle cracked. The flame dropped, hissed against the dust. No one moved. The sound hadn't come to threaten. It had come to declare. Whit chambered another round, slowly. The air around him was still. "You don't come here with fire," he said. "Not here." Darren looked at him, not in fear, but in defeat, a long, tired expression, like a man who realized the land wouldn't listen to him anymore. He tossed the letter into the dirt, turned, walked away. The others followed, their torches smothered, their boots dragging. By the time they were gone, the stars had returned, sharp, and cold. Mara walked out into the orchard. Whit followed. They stood beneath the oldest tree. She placed her hand against its trunk. "I was 15, she said, "when they held me down, branded me like cattle. My brothers didn't speak. My father cried after. Whit didn't speak. He watched the way her fingers moved over the bark. I left that same night," she said, "walked for 2 days, came back 3 years later and planted 5 new trees. Didn't tell anyone, just kept planting." She turned to him. "I never wanted saving. I wanted stillness." He stepped forward, and without words took off his coat and laid it around her shoulders. Her hands caught the edges, not clutching, just accepting. "I'm not a savior," he said, voice low. "I'm just someone who listens." She looked up at the sky. "I don't know if this land can grow again." "It already has," he answered. The fire had never come, but its threat lingered, in the scorched patch near the fence, in the broken torch left behind, in the soil disturbed by boots that had no right to be here. But the tree still stood. The orchard breathed in the night. And beside the woman with a branded name and the man with no home, the earth was still, but not silent. It waited. The days that followed carried no triumph. The wind returned in waves, curling through the orchard with slow hands, lifting leaves only to let them fall again. The earth remained dry, though cooler now. The sky above wore a gentler blue, the kind that comes after a fever breaks. Mara moved through her trees like before, pail in hand, knife at her hip. Nothing had changed in her routine. She watered, she cleared brush. She whispered the names of trees as she passed them. Naomi, Ruth, Clara, Mercy. Names not marked on any map, not written in any ledger, names that lived only in her breath. Whit stayed. He didn't ask to. She didn't ask him to leave. He repaired the chicken coop's roof again, despite no chickens, replaced fence wire, even though nothing threatened to escape. He sharpened his tools at dusk, chopped wood without a fire to build. At night they sat beneath the porch awning, side by side. Sometimes she read from a small book of Psalms, the words just above, a whisper. He didn't bow his head, he just listened. The scripture, to him, was less about faith and more about ache, old wounds written down. They never spoke of Darren again, nor of the fire that didn't come. The torches were gone, and yet the orchard bore the memory of them in every shadow, every whisper of breeze that passed too quickly through the trees. One morning, Mara woke before dawn and stood beneath the largest tree. She didn't touch it this time, just looked up at its twisted branches, now bare. The sky was beginning to pink behind it. A single star still hung visible in the fading dark. Whit watched her from a distance, leaning on the fence, coat drawn tight. She turned and walked back toward the house. "I want to plant something new," she said. He waited, not for memory, not for the dead, just something for the now. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small cloth pouch. From it, she spilled 5 tiny seeds into her palm. "Lupines," she said. "They grow even in drought, not for food, just color." Whit nodded. They dug the holes together behind the house where the soil held a little more shade. She placed each seed like it was a heartbeat. He pressed the dirt back with hands that once only buried things. When it was done, they stood over the patch, dust on their knees, silence between them. "You'll leave someday," she said, not as a question. He didn't deny it. "I will," she nodded, "but not yet." "No?" Mara looked at him then, really looked. Not as a stranger who rode in with dust on his boots and a rifle across his back, not as the man who stood between her and the men who brought fire. She looked at him like one looks at a scar, not with grief, but with recognition. "I think I would have broken," she said softly, "if you'd spoken too much." He smiled barely. "I don't talk unless silence won't do." She stepped closer, rested her forehead against his chest, not in surrender, but in stillness. His arms came around her slow, like limbs around a sleeping thing, not to hold, but to shelter. No vows were spoken, no promises etched into the air. They remained in that small space between dawn and day, leaning into one another, 2 shadows cast by the same sliver of light. That evening, Whit built a bench under the tree marked Naomi Clare, not finely made, rough-hewn, uneven, but solid. He sat there some nights, alone, hat in his lap, listening to the orchard breathe. The wind spoke through the branches like women humming lullabies, long forgotten. Crows returned to the barn roof, quiet now, as if their work was done. Mara sometimes stood in the doorway watching him. She didn't interrupt. The orchard, once dry and brittle, held a hint of change. Tiny green shoots pressed up between cracks, not enough to be called life yet, but enough to be called hope. One morning, much later, Mara took his hand in hers without a word and led him up the hill behind the house. They stood together as the sun climbed slow and full over the horizon. Below them, the orchard shimmered with the light of morning, gold on branches, silver on bark, dust rising like incense from the soil. She turned to him, face soft but sure. "Whatever name I once carried," she said, "I let it go here." Whit reached into his coat and removed a small wooden token, a flat coin carved with a circle and cross. He didn't explain it, just pressed it into her palm. Then they stood there a long time, beneath the expanse of sky that stretched from one end of silence to the other. A sky that had judged no one, saved no one, spoken to no one. A sky that simply watched, endless and indifferent and somehow still enough to hold them. No marriage, no church, just earth, wind, sky, and two souls that no longer needed to be alone.